Yes, ideology, and particularly rigid ideology, they can be a very damaging thing when brutally applied by governments or government institutions. And it's not just true for the ideology of equal outcomes in education, but it also holds true when it comes to the ideology of environmentalism. And we are seeing that with an exemplar of contradictory blunder by the federal government in the arena of environmentalism and climate change policy. It's sort of a Keystone Cops rendition, Washington, D.C. style. So let me give you the two contradictory ideologies that are coming to a clash with the environmentalism of the federal government bureaucratic state. On one side, there is the government obsession concerning electric vehicles. You've got mandates and subsidies and phase outs and tax credits and trillions of taxpayer dollars that are thrown under the umbrella of the whole of government to do what? To force electric vehicles down the throats of consumers. We're told that this needs to happen, that it's an enlightened progression to help tackle climate change. And then on the other side, there is the government obsession, with the puppet master being the radical environmental movement, of keeping all resources in the ground. And those resources can range from the obvious of uranium and coal and natural gas and oil and timber and so on, but those resources also increasingly are including metals and materials needed to manufacture electric vehicles, specifically electric vehicle batteries. And therein lies the contradictory clash within radical ideologies embedded in government. Recently, the Department of the Interior decided to block off a large swath of Minnesota's Superior National Forest for mining. Now, what makes this especially interesting is that that area of Minnesota just so happens to hold one of the world's largest undeveloped mineral deposits of copper and nickel and cobalt. You need all three of those materials to make batteries for electric vehicles, which means you need to be able to mine all three of those materials to achieve the federal government's mandates and aspirations regarding electrification of the transportation sector. Now you see the conflicting and contradictory absurdity of state intervention in action. On Monday, and on one hand, the federal government throws bottomless subsidy and far-ranging mandates to force electric vehicles upon the driving population. The next day, on Tuesday, and on the other hand of the federal government, you see edicts that mining of any materials needed to manufacture batteries for electric vehicles is going to be prohibited in an area of a state that holds some of the richest deposits of those materials on Earth. But it gets more contradictory and more absurd. Because while those two things are going on, the federal government, through the State Department, is hard at work making things even more convoluted. That's because in January, the State Department pledged to help build electric vehicle battery supply chains in the African nations of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. And it is not a secret that the environmental standards and the labor practices in the mining complex of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia, they leave a lot to be desired relative to the standards applied in the United States. The substance of the State Department's efforts is to effectively offshore environmental destruction and human rights abuses so that the well-off suburbanite can purchase an overpriced electric vehicle as their second vehicle and receive a generous tax credit when doing so. A lot of those suburbanites driving those pricey electric vehicles maybe self-proclaim themselves to be environmentalists, with the politically correct Climate Action Now sign in their front yard, and maybe the sign instead should say something like, "We support child labor and environmental destruction in faraway places." Probably too long of a slogan to fit on such a cute little yard sign. And there you have it, sort of a trifecta of government incompetence via state intervention under the cover of saving the planet. Use taxpayer dollars to stifle consumer choice and subsidize electric vehicles for corporations and for affluent buyers. Then you prohibit domestic mining of any of the materials that are required to manufacture batteries for electric vehicles, thus stifling regional economies and family-sustaining wages and jobs for those who would be employed in the mining sector. And then you use more taxpayer dollars to subsidize the development of the mining industry in faraway lands where environmental destruction and human rights abuses are nearly a certainty. None of it helps the planet, none of it helps the American taxpayer, and none of it will build a middle class in either underserved American communities or in the developing world. Now, why don't we hear more about this epic bungling by government? Where are all the government accountability institutions? Where are the alleged environmentalists calling out a net horrible decision for the planet? Where are all the nationalists on the right and the progressives on the left demanding that this incompetence comes to an end? And of course, where in the world is the media and journalists who carry the duty to daylight facts and truths that impact society and economies and lives across the globe? Sadly, they're all AWOL because their fiduciary and moral compasses have been largely spinning off kilter for quite some time. But now you, constant listener, you are armed with the information and knowledge to help advocate for better outcomes and a more effective government.